Good morning, class. First of all, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties with the Canvas conference last night. One of the things that I wanted to do was to make sure that even though we don't have our time in class, we kind of focused on moving our discussion to wrapping up these research papers. And one of the important aspects of any research paper in the humanities is making sure that the author's voice of the research really translates and really comes through in the research paper. And the section where that's supposed to happen is going to be in the discussion / analysis / conclusion portion of the paper. So that's what I wanted to focus on last night. And although we couldn't have our live session, hopefully this video will give you some of the important points that I was trying to convey before the sound cut out on us. So I want to show you the presentation, and I want to also show you the examples that go along with the presentation for the analysis portion of the paper. You know, in the analysis or discussion section of the paper, it's the place where we start making connections between the works, and we also think a lot about, well, what did we gain from the research that we did? So I just want to give you a few pointers for how to begin that conversation in that section. You know, this is the place where you can tell what you've gained from the experience of actually doing this research project. So let's dive in. As you move towards the end of your paper, the goal is going to be to make sure that you can give some analysis. And I keep saying analysis, but what exactly does that mean? I mean, when you're doing a research paper in the hard sciences, analysis can oftentimes be very data driven. We're in the humanities, so it's not so much about the data. The analysis is about what we learned and what we found. Whenever we talk about analysis in the humanities, our goal is to consider, okay, now that I've done all this research, how has my thinking changed? How has the research affected my thinking? Does it reveal anything new, anything exciting, anything intriguing? In my analysis section, I can think about, okay, now that I've done this research, what do I think some of the important causes of this particular issue were? What do I think are some of the most important key factors that either allows this thing to happen or affects people's thinking around it? You know, this is an opportunity for me to really say what I think and what I feel and what I found. Right? So how do I do that? I get the idea. Some of you might be saying, I get the idea that you want me to say what I think in the analysis section. Don't focus so much on the research you've already done, right? Now's the time for you to talk about what you gained from the research. But how do you begin that process? Well, like a lot of the other places in the research process, we begin with certain questions. So let's think about some of the questions that we ask ourselves when we do analysis. So some of the first questions are as follows, right? What are some of the things that you first noticed when you started doing your research or you started looking at the results? What are some of the first things that jumped out at you? Because the things that you found interesting are the things that you want to highlight in the analysis section. So how does that happen? How do you begin to write that? Well, you could start off with a statement like this. One of the most intriguing things I noticed in my research was, and just talk about it. Again, this isn't necessarily a place where you have to parse all of the, research and start quoting people and that kind of thing. You can refer back to the research that you did, of course. But this is a place where you start making connections. You know, I would think that when you're writing this, you don't even go back to your research. Just write what you remember and the connections that are already there in your mind. That's going to be the most important thing. So let's look at some of the other questions. What do you notice that you didn't expect? Oftentimes in our analysis, we should talk about the things that were surprising to us. Sometimes we won't write or talk about the things that we didn't notice at first because sometimes we think that we should have been smart enough to see it. But when we're doing research, that shouldn't be our goal. It's really important to say, hey, these things surprised me, because chances are it could be surprising to your readers as well. So again, how do you enter into that conversation where you talk about the surprising aspects of your research? Let's take a look. So look at this statement. When I was exploring X, I did not expect to see Y. Comments like this make the research seem relevant because it revealed something that was new. Research papers are not supposed to just regurgitate things that everybody knows. And if you don't really feel like, hey, I don't know what in my research was really revelatory, this is the moment where you can at least say, hey, this was surprising to me. I didn't know this. And again, that makes the research relevant. Great type of statement to have in the analysis or discussion section. So what are some other questions? Well, what things did you notice that you can't explain? Again, sometimes we have a tendency to want to make it seem like we know it all. And I understand that that's an aspect of the authorial stance that we oftentimes take in research. But the reality is we don't know it all. And we are limited in what we have access to and what our prior knowledge allows us to really comprehend. And so it's really important in research to say, hey, I cannot account for these things that I found. All the time in research, we find things that seem important, but we just don't have a way of figuring out what it is yet. But that's an important aspect of research, because you can say, hey, I think these things are important. I need another researcher out there to investigate this because I can't do it. Remember, research and scholarship is a shared activity. So it's important to share the things that are unexplainable to us because it gives a research opportunity to somebody else. Right? So we should acknowledge the things that we couldn't explain. It doesn't make you less of a writer. It actually makes you more of a scholar. Understood? Great. So how do we do that? Let's take a look. Check this out. After examining blank, it is still unclear to me how, whatever. That's the kind of statement that's a great lead-in to the limitations of your research and the limitations of your understanding. And it's a good thing to help wrap up your research because it leaves space for another researcher to continue on your work. Make sense? Awesome. Let's keep going. I really like this last question. What do you notice now that you did not notice earlier? To me, this is the kind of statement that we usually find at the end of an analysis section and typically helps to launch your conclusion, because it really helps to show that, hey, I first thought this, but now I'm able to see these things here. It helps to show a deeper level of perception that you have from having done the research. So it automatically gives a benefit. It shows that there's a benefit to the research if the only benefit is that you learned something, right? So, how do we do that? Now, sometimes people will do a lead-in. They'll say, well, clearly, ba 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 ba, or now such and such and such and such. These kinds of lead-ins are helpful, but they're not kind of the same kinds of lead-ins that I've just given you guys, like the full sentences. Sometimes a lead-in is very simple. It says, hey, I conclude blah, 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 blah. And these conclusions generally are the insights that the reader has gained from the research. I like these kinds of statements, but again, these statements, as useful as they are, they don't kind of fit into the system of sentence templates that I've given you before. But I want you to know that they exist, and when you see them, or if you use them, a lot of times they're used to summarize the analysis section. I want to give you one that's a little bit clearer, though. One that's a little bit more useful for saying, hey, I used to think about it this way, but now I can see something a little bit deeper, a little bit clearer. Check this statement out. Looking at blank, it is evident that now this kind of statement really helps to clarify, hey, when I look at this particular item or this particular project or this particular aspect of the research, now it's evident that these particular things have occurred or this particular consequence is going to happen, right? Because now it's clear to you, you also want to make sure that it's clear to the reader. The new revelations that you have should be new revelations for the reader too. And that's what you really want to have at the end of the paper. Those are going to be those memorable moments that help to make your research paper really valuable to whoever reads it. So, the last aspect of your analysis, or even in your conclusion, the last thing that you want to do is you want to offer up some reflection for what the research meant to you. And that last question about what you notice helps to lead us into that. So when we do reflection, a lot of times, there are lots of questions that we can address within our reflections of our research. And when I say reflections, I'm really talking about, okay, here are my final thoughts about what I found and what I think it means. All right, and here are some questions, I want to think critically about my hypothesis. I want to think critically about my ideas, my research questions when I first started. So I want to be able to ask, well, where do I think this stuff came from? Why do I think somebody made this? Why do I think this research is important? Why do I think particular items that I identified are important? How do I think things can be different? What did I learn from all this? These are great questions, but these are really just questions for you to get your thoughts together. When it comes to putting a reflection section in your paper, I want you to remember that your reflection is really all about what you gained. You can talk about what the implications might be for other people for whom this information is important. That's an important portion of reflection too. But even if you can't connect the research to individual stakeholders for whom this is important, you should be able to connect the research to why it's important to you. And doing that makes all the difference. Again, how do you do that? Very simply, you can start off with a statement that says, well, for me. For me, this subject exposes whatever. Or for me, this subject revealed whatever. Or for me, this research helped me to understand whatever. The key is, at the end of your research, you should be able to state what this research has done for you. Your knowledge, your understanding, your inspiration, whatever it is. And by doing that, you make your research paper successful. All right? So these are some of the things that I wanted to talk about. Just building on the analysis section of the paper, figuring out how we might want to wrap up our discussion. And keep in mind that wrapping up the discussion really means you just talking about the stuff that you learned. You don't need to revisit an article or anything to begin writing this. Maybe to shape it up, but not to begin writing it. I think these leads and these considerations can really help you do that as we start bringing this thing to a close. So I appreciate your time. Hopefully this will be helpful for you. And I look forward to talking to you all in the next couple of days. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.